Imagine walking out your front door to find a stranger trespassing on your property, demanding you let them patrol your land. Sounds crazy, right? Well, that's exactly what happened when one person encountered a woman who had decided to take matters into her own hands. This so-called Karen didn't just wander onto a regular piece of land. She unknowingly trespassed on a restricted military testing field. The tension? She had no idea what she was walking into. And that's where the story takes a wild turn. It all starts with a confrontation where the trespasser, convinced that she had every right to patrol, refused to leave, even after being told she was on private, off-limits land. But it wasn't just the land that was off-limits. This area was a high-security military zone used for testing. What's worse, she thought she was above the rules and tried to argue her way through the situation. What happened next will leave you questioning how far some people will go to justify their actions, especially when they have no idea what they're really dealing with. Stay tuned to find out how this jaw-dropping story unfolds. The land in question was located deep in a quiet rural area, far from any bustling city. It had been in the family for generations, passed down through the years with an unspoken rule: respect the land, and it will respect you. However, as the years went by, more and more people were unaware of its true purpose, often seeing the overgrown fields and wooded areas as a peaceful place to walk or explore. Little did they know, beneath the surface, it was far from ordinary. This particular morning, the trespasser, let's call her Karen, had pulled up in a dusty sedan, convinced she had stumbled upon a simple piece of land that she could patrol. In her mind, she had every right to be there. But what she didn't know was that the area had been off-limits for decades due to its secretive use by the military. Testing, training, and experimental operations took place right under the radar, and the consequences of wandering into that zone were serious. When Karen stepped out of her car, she had no idea that she was walking straight into something much larger than herself. The military kept their operations under tight wraps, with only a few people aware of the true nature of the land. As she marched toward the property, the tension was already rising. Unaware of the high stakes, she was about to get more than she'd bargained for. What would happen next? Keep watching to find out. As Karen stepped further into the thick brush, she couldn't help but feel a sense of authority, as if the land was hers to claim. The air was thick with the quiet hum of nature, but something about it felt off. She brushed aside her initial unease, telling herself it was just an unfamiliar place. But the deeper she went, the more she began to notice signs that things weren't quite right. There were warning signs posted here and there, barely visible behind the overgrown trees. She didn't think much of them, dismissing them as some outdated markers from a bygone era. But soon her carefree stroll was interrupted. A car pulled up in the distance, kicking up dust as it rolled toward her. At first, she thought it was just a neighbor. Perhaps someone who had come to confront her about being on private property. But as the car stopped, out stepped two men in uniforms, tactical gear, with badges clearly identifying them as military personnel. They were calm but firm, their presence making the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "Ma'am, you're trespassing," one of them said, his voice steady but carrying an air of authority that sent a chill down her spine. Karen, still unfazed, tried to explain that she had every right to be there, that she was just patrolling her own land. The men exchanged a glance. They were clearly used to this type of situation, but there was something more to this one. They didn't respond right away. Instead, they silently gestured for her to follow them. Something in their eyes made her stomach turn, a mix of concern and something else, something she couldn't quite place. As they led her toward a more secure area of the field, Karen's mind raced. What had she walked into? Why were they acting so serious? And why did she suddenly feel so small in the face of this unexplainable situation? The tension was thick, and Karen's sense of control started slipping away. Was she about to be escorted off the land, or was something else going to happen? The mystery was deepening, And Karen was just beginning to realize that her reckless decision to patrol this land was about to have much bigger consequences than she could have imagined. As the two men escorted Karen deeper into the restricted area, the world around her seemed to close in. The dense trees gave way to a barren stretch of land, eerily quiet, with only the sound of their footsteps breaking the stillness. Her heart was racing, and her mind couldn't catch up. What had she gotten herself into? The land she thought was just an empty stretch of wilderness was beginning to feel like something entirely different, something far more dangerous. Karen glanced nervously at the military personnel, but they weren't saying much, leaving her to stew in the growing anxiety. They led her to a small, unmarked building surrounded by high fences, barbed wire, and cameras. It looked almost like a forgotten outpost, tucked away from the rest of the world. As they approached, Karen's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of what was happening here. But there was nothing, only a creeping sense of dread creeping up her spine. One of the men stopped in front of the building and turned to her. "Stay here," he said in a tone that left no room for argument. The other man disappeared behind a door, leaving Karen alone with her thoughts. She tried to steady her breathing, but her mind was spinning. The air felt thick, heavy with an impending sense of something about to happen. What were they hiding? Why was she even here? She heard muffled voices from inside the building, but they were too far for her to make out. Then she saw something that made her blood run cold. A truck approaching in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. As it drew closer, she saw men in dark uniforms climbing out, all armed. Her stomach dropped. This wasn't just a simple trespassing issue anymore. She wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was stepping into a much bigger, much darker situation than she could have ever imagined. Her mind raced with questions. What were they going to do with her? Why were they suddenly bringing in more people? Were they preparing for something big? The tension in the air was thick enough to choke on, and Karen felt herself becoming a pawn in a game she didn't understand. The sense of unease was unbearable now, and she could only stand there, helpless and anxious, as the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. But the question remained, what would happen when those pieces finally fit? Just as Karen began to feel the weight of her situation, the door to the small building creaked open, and the two men who had been escorting her emerged, looking even more serious than before. They motioned for her to follow them, but there was a subtle shift in the air. Something had changed. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel it, a new layer of tension settling over everything. As they walked, Karen noticed something that had been there all along, but hadn't fully registered. Strange markings on the ground, faint lines in the dirt that seemed to form a pattern. It wasn't just the isolation that felt off, it was the purpose of this place, something that seemed so much bigger than her misunderstanding about trespassing. But she still had no idea what was truly going on. Then, just as she was about to ask what the hell was going on, the ground beneath her feet trembled, just slightly, like a low rumble that sent a shiver through her bones. The military men stopped in their tracks, their eyes immediately scanning the area with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. Something was happening, something that had nothing to do with her. Suddenly, a loud, piercing siren blared across the field, filling the air with a sharp, metallic sound. The men cursed under their breath and quickly ushered Karen to the side of the building, almost as if they were trying to shield her from something. Then, out of nowhere, a massive explosion echoed in the distance, shaking the ground beneath her again. The blast was far enough that it didn't seem like it was directly targeting her, but the force of it rattled her senses, leaving her dizzy. Karen instinctively ducked down, her mind racing. What the hell was going on? What had she stumbled into? The military men were on high alert now, communicating with each other in clipped, urgent voices, but none of it made sense. The urgency in their actions, the chaos suddenly erupting around her, it was like something out of a nightmare. She was no longer just a trespasser, she was in the middle of something much bigger, something that was spiraling out of control. As she huddled behind the building, she couldn't help but wonder, was this a test? A military operation? Or was there something even darker unfolding right before her eyes? The sirens continued to wail, and the explosion was just the beginning. Whatever had been triggered, it was only getting worse, and Karen had no idea what would come next. The air was thick with the sound of the sirens as the military personnel rushed around, their voices sharp with urgency. Karen's heart was pounding, her body pressed against the cold wall of the building, her mind spiraling with confusion and fear. She had no idea what was happening, but the sheer chaos unfolding around her was enough to make her realize that this was far more than an accidental trespass. Something had triggered all of this, and it had something to do with the blast. Suddenly, one of the men grabbed her arm, pulling her to her feet. "You need to get inside. Now." His voice was frantic, and for the first time, Karen saw genuine fear in his eyes. She didn't argue. Whatever was going on, she was no longer in control. As they rushed inside the building, she could hear the sound of more explosions in the distance. The walls were thick, but the tremors still made them shake, and she could feel the fear of everyone around her. Inside, the room was dimly lit, with rows of computers and monitors blinking with strange data. It looked like a high-tech command center, but nothing here made any sense to Karen. She tried to ask again what was happening, but the man just shook his head, his face grim. "You don't understand. This was never supposed to happen." Before Karen could respond, the door to the room slammed open. The second man stepped in, looking even more agitated than before. "It's worse than we thought. The testing, whatever it was, we've lost control. It's spreading." Karen's stomach dropped. Lost control. What was she a part of? She wasn't supposed to be here, but now she realized she had walked into something far beyond her comprehension. Just as the first man turned to her, his face pale, a distant but unmistakable sound filled the air, a deep, unnatural hum that vibrated the very foundation of the building. Something was coming. Then the unexpected happened. The door behind them flung open, and an unfamiliar voice called out, "Get her out now." It was a woman, standing in the doorway, her expression cold and determined. The military men froze, and for a moment, Karen thought she saw a flicker of recognition in the woman's eyes, like she knew her. "What's going on?" Karen's voice trembled, but no one answered. The woman approached her, grabbing her by the arm with a surprising strength. "You're not supposed to be here, but now that you are, you've become part of the problem." Before Karen could protest, the woman shoved her toward the door. "There's no time. We need to evacuate now." As they ran through the hallways, Karen's thoughts were racing. Part of her wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the urgency of the moment kept her moving. Then, just as they reached the exit, the woman turned to her with a cryptic look. "You need to know something. That explosion, those tests, they weren't an accident. They were trying to contain something, and you triggered it." Karen's blood ran cold. What did she mean? What had she triggered? Before she could ask, the woman pushed her through the door and into the night air, just as the building shook again. The blast was closer now, and the ground beneath their feet felt like it was about to give way. Karen looked back, but the building was already collapsing in on itself. As they ran toward the waiting vehicle, the woman glanced over her shoulder and said, "You may not understand now, but the tests were never just for weapons. They were experimenting with something far more dangerous. And you, Karen, just became part of a much larger experiment." The vehicle sped off into the night, leaving Karen with more questions than answers, her mind swirling with a horrifying realization that what she had stumbled upon wasn't just a simple case of trespassing. It was the beginning of something much darker, and she was now tangled in its web. As the vehicle raced through the night, Karen's mind struggled to process everything that had just unfolded. The woman who had introduced herself as Agent Hayes remained silent, her eyes focused on the road ahead. Karen couldn't shake the feeling that she had narrowly escaped something far more dangerous than she could ever have imagined. She thought about the land, the tests, and the explosion. Her entire world had shifted in just a few hours. Agent Hayes finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence. We're taking you somewhere safe for now, but you're not going to remember much of this. You don't have a choice. They've already erased parts of your memory. Karen blinked, confusion creeping in. Erase my memory. Why? Because, Hayes continued, you were never meant to uncover the truth, but now that you have, there's no going back. The experiments, they weren't just about military power. They were manipulating human memory, emotions, and perceptions. You walked into the middle of something that's been hidden for years.